Welcome to this week's edition of Two Men in the Middle, where two men in the middle of the country pontificate about politics, world news, and current events. I'm Brandon Kinnig.
I'm Craig Hewing.
So, Craig, let's start this week by talking about impeachment. So that will be the focus headed into this next week with the hearings beginning. Impeachment managers on the Democratic side are gearing up for arguments. We know who Trump's attorneys are going to be now. We know that Trump is not going to testify. What are you looking to get out of this week? What do you think are going to be some key takeaways?
I think this has the potential to be interesting. There were two original charges that passed the House for impeachment, and these were basically incitement. And then this was also around his phone call with the Georgia state's attorney. And I forget what was they were accusing him basically of trying to alter the election results by threatening an elected official. So those two things that I think at the time, the Democrats, they knew that's what they could pass, and they could pass that quickly through impeachment to get it to the Senate. The problem with those is those are concepts that to persuade senators, you would have to make a legal argument. Incitement is a legal term, and it has a very legal definition that's actually very, very narrow. We talked about last week, I could badmouth Jason to you all day long. And then if you went over and punched Jason in the face and said, well, Craig told me to do that's not true. Incitement is I have to specifically order your actions to be violent. And by that sheer legal definition, that's not what Trump did. It was certainly irresponsible. It was certainly reckless. There was certainly a cumulative effect, too, that led to the conditions for that to happen. But incitement was always going to get bogged down in what is the legal definition of the word and how does it apply to the president. Same thing with him threatening Roethlisberger. I probably said his name wrong. I think I probably combined his name and Ben Roethlisberger. But when he made a veiled threat to him, and that was going to be boring and pointless because the argument was going to be, did he threaten him or not? When he said, hey, look, all I need is 11,800 votes, did that constitute a threat? And when the president says that, is that threatening? That was just going to bog down into an argument. I could see a couple of days of debate on that, take the vote, and let's go. What the Democrats did this week is they added a third charge for dereliction of duty. This is the one that I think is going to be most problematic because I don't understand what is the off ramp for this for Republicans. What they're going to focus on in this charge is there was a 3 or 4 hour window to while that attack was happening that Trump, as the commander in chief, and as commander in chief, his primary duty is to protect the Capitol, that it appears he took no action. And then there's even the debate, did he take the action that was needed beforehand to protect the Capitol? I think this is a charge that, number one, everybody watching and listening to this trial, even all the senators, they can completely understand. You had a responsibility to protect democracy by physically protecting the Capitol. As the president, that is one of your number one responsibilities, and you were completely derelict in that duty. I think that's where the Democrats are going to try to spend most of their time. I think that's where they're going to call their most witnesses. And that's where, if anything's going to move 17 Republican senators, this might have a chance.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this was clever and savvy for them to add this charge. I think unlike incitement, which can be picked apart, and looked at from a number of different ways, you can have Republicans, attempt to define incitement differently, get into the nuances of what incitement actually means. You can't do that with dereliction of duty. It's much more unambiguous. Like you said, it's very clear because this allows Democrats to put forward the evidence that is very strong that Trump did not act. The fact that the vice president is the one who had to sign off on the National Guard coming in. The fact that Trump did not continue to tweet out messaging that only provided reinforcement to what was happening rather than trying to have the instigators stand down. So you can look at his entire action all the way, including the fact that he and well, not he, but his attorney, Giuliani, was making calls at the time the Capitol was under attack, and the senators were being held hostage, trying to get them to flip votes. I mean, that is very strong evidence to the fact that Trump knew exactly what was going on and was using it to his advantage.
And I think what this does is this makes this impeachment about the actions of that day. Yeah. We're not going to get bogged down into this, what specific words did Trump say at what time and what were their effect? Because that's something that is very much depending on your opinion or your political opinion. You have a very different perspective on that. Now we can go through, I think what the Democrats will do is they will go through the day's timeline while this was happening. Like, for example, after he got off stage, where did he go? Who was he there with? What did he say? What was his reaction when he saw the crowd begin to form outside the Capitol building? We've heard he was extremely pleased. Are we going to hear witnesses that say, yeah, I was in the White House with the president. He was watching this. This is exactly what he wanted. Do we get into who actually made the call? We heard it was Pence for the National Guard. We heard it was Trump. We could hear witness testimony to actually how that process happened. To me, that is way more compelling and interesting. And I keep coming back to things the viewer can understand. I can understand that, hey, there's a riot happening. You're watching it. It's your job. You need to do something about it. And the testimony and the video testimony, if they choose to put that on, is going to be very, very compelling.
Yes, extremely compelling, because I think, like you said, on one side you have administration officials and even non-administration officials. It would be very compelling if they end up having Maryland Governor Larry Hogan testify, because he attempted to send the National Guard and it was hours before he got a response back. I mean, that's pretty damning. So you have the inaction and the timeline of that inaction with the witnesses who can testify to that. As well as those who could potentially testify to what the president was thinking and feeling and his reaction in real time in the moment. And there were many administration officials off the record who said they were horrified. I would think that potentially some of them could be compelled to testify if they felt that way.
And I think, too, we can get into that connection. We know the Capitol Police got intelligence that they should expect problems. Why did they not act on that? That now comes into play. Did the Trump administration have any direct contact, any decision-making authority? Did they intervene in any way in regards to what the physical security around the Capitol looked like that day? So I think this is the area that they can make the most impact on.
And there's that, and the fact that D.C. requested National Guard troops days ahead, and they were turned down. So that request was denied. So that's, again, just another indication. And like you said, I think it's going to be key to put this all in perspective in terms of the timeline. You have to start with that timeline going back and then, kind of work your way to what happened that day and the day's events. And you bring in those witnesses who can testify all around that. And then if you end up having witnesses, it appears that a couple of the insurrectionists are willing to testify that they felt compelled based on what Trump said, that they thought they were doing what he wanted them to do. You combine that's the kind of other side of the equation in terms of showing how that instigation occurred. So there's a very good way that this can be presented to where it's very impactful. And so, I think hopefully they will be able to produce the witnesses, put them into the timeline and make the case, because it does feel like there's enough pieces there, just putting those pieces together.
And I think the goal of this is to back the Senate Republicans into a corner and say, after hearing all of this, if we sat here, let's say for a week and a half, you heard 8 days of this testimony, and let's just say for sake of argument, some of the worst possible things that can come out do come out. The goal is to make Republican senators to say, I'm going to ignore all of that and still vote not to impeach because of a technical reason or a constitutionality reason. And I think that's the look they want to, once again, they want to put the Republicans in a box, force them to say, I am not going to take an action on his behavior, which is obviously wrong. What he did was obviously impeachable, but for these technical reasons or these constitutional reasons, I'm not going to vote to do this. And I think that's the political gain the Democrats want out of this.
Yes. And also to that, I think that it would be very interesting. I'm sure many of them will do this. So some of them will quote some of the House Republicans who came out very strongly against us during their vote for impeachment. People like Liz Cheney, whose comments were used by House Democrats leading up to the impeachment vote. I think you might see Senate Democrats use her comments as well. Because again, anytime you can use the comments of a Republican on the day's events, that just provides, I think, more fodder for applying pressure to Senate Republicans. And we know that there's 5 Senate Republicans who voted for this to go forward. So I think off the bat, you probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of 55 votes for impeachment, which is already precedent setting for the Senate. Because if you think back to Trump's first impeachment and then back to Bill Clinton's impeachment, neither of them had a majority of 50% plus one. This impeachment will. So then the question is, how do you get to 17? And like we've talked about before, it really all kind of depends on Mitch McConnell, because he brings many more votes with him if he votes affirmatively.
I think if the Democrats go down this path, and this is the thing that dereliction of duty is the thing they spend the most time on. I think there's 2 potential outcomes. Well, there's 3. One is you get 55, the 50 Democrats plus the 5. This is Sass, Murkowski, Collins, Romney, that crew, and you get 55. But it falls short. That's one outcome. Another one is that they don't get any Republicans to come over. It's a straight party line vote, and it dies there. The third one, like you mentioned, is we know, I think we're fairly confident that at least 3 of the 5 that voted to allow this to move forward will vote to impeach. If you can get that to 5, 6, 7, 8, can you entice somebody like McConnell? If the testimony is so damning that McConnell knows the impact it's going to have on the Republican Party, can you turn him, and then can he bring 6 or 7 old guard folks with him? I think that would be, from a Democrat's perspective, that's the best possible outcome you can hope for. But I still think that's a pretty big long shot.
It is a very long shot, because if you were to get all 5 that voted for impeachment to go forward, and then you add McConnell, you still need 11 Senate Republicans to come forward. And while it's not impossible, that's a lot. Like it's, you would need John Thune. You would need people like Jerry Moran of Kansas. You would need to be able to get anybody who's just slightly independent minded in any way.
Senator Moran. You worked for Senator Moran. Is there a possibility? And just for framing, Senator Moran was one of the 10 Republican senators that approached President Biden regards to the COVID stimulus to be bipartisan. He was in that group, I believe.
Right. Yep. And Kansas was, on January 6th, we had Marshall who voted to disenfranchise those states. Moran did not, and came out before that vote saying that he was going to vote to certify the results. So there is that possibility. Moran is, I think, one of those who could be swayed. His comments on what happened on January 6th and the certification indicates that he is very uneasy with what has happened and what has transpired.
So knowing him, you could see a path where he possibly could vote to impeach Trump.
I could, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's how many of those senators on the Republican side exist. I don't think we know. We know there's a whole huge block that would never vote to impeach Trump. But if you're in that Moran category, what is the evidence you would have to hear to sway him? I think that's the unknown of this trial. The other thing that's really weird is how witnesses are handled. And when the main Democrat House member who's leading the impeachment, when he kind of invited Trump to testify, and we had that whole drama this week, the Senate has the ability to subpoena someone, but I'm pretty sure the Fifth Amendment and the right not to self-incriminate applies to this trial. you can subpoena somebody to appear in a Senate impeachment trial. You can force them to get into the witness stand, but you can't force them to testify against themselves.
Right. And I think that, Senate Democrats have to be aware of that, because it doesn't do them any good if they are able to produce witnesses and then on the stand, these witnesses, decide to not self-incriminate. And so they don't provide anything of value during the proceedings.
And this is where impeachment gets weird, because it's kind of this, it's called a trial and it's kind of this legal procedure, but it's really not. I mean, the Democrats just threw another charge into impeachment basically through a memo.
Yeah.
They didn't go back and kind of re-vote. They didn't indict him. They didn't re-vote on the articles of impeachment. They basically just said, we're going to throw another one in because we think it'll work. That is completely the opposite of what would happen in the criminal justice system. And to your point, nobody's going to call a witness that is a hostile witness against their cause. So the whole idea of if you truly wanted to try to get Trump to testify during this impeachment trial, you're probably looking at months and months of court cases that would almost have to work its way to the Supreme Court to see if you could force him to testify in his own impeachment, which I don't think you can.
Yeah, I think that's highly unlikely. To happen. But you're right. I think it's easy to think about. Because the way that this is handled with a trial, and obviously, someone who presides as a judge, it's easy to get into the mindset of thinking that this is a legal procedure, but it's really a political procedure with legal undertones. But it's political.
And every Republican who was around for the Clinton impeachment knows this is a political process.
Right.
Clinton's impeachment was 100% political. I think this is I would say even the first attempt to impeach Trump was more political than anything. I think this is the first impeachment that I can recall. Maybe this is the first impeachment outside of Nixon where actually there are criminal elements to it, and you could try to make the case that laws were broken. But again, this isn't a court of law.
No.
What do you think about Roberts not presiding too? That was a little bit of a wait a minute, why do you not want to preside? And then he offered no opinion to why he wouldn't.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. I did not see that coming, and I don't know. He was not a fan of presiding over the first impeachment. By all indications, he was reluctant, but did that duty. It seems to be he has a tendency of trying to avoid anything that's anywhere overtly political. So that probably has something to do with it. But I was still surprised by that. And I have not heard any more as to the thought behind it or his personal reasoning. There hasn't been any commentary.
Do you think it delegitimizes the proceeding in any way to have a member of the Senate preside and not the Chief Supreme Court Justice?
I think it does slightly. It doesn't help. I think it really is too bad, because I think that having the Chief Justice there gives it an air of impartiality and neutrality. And the problem is too, by having someone who is partisan who's now presiding as judge, it opens that person up for challenge and for much more direct criticism and claims that they're being overtly political, no matter how they preside. And the fact is, Leahy could do a perfect job and still be criticized simply because of his partisan nature, and that's something that's much more difficult to do with Roberts. I think back to the first impeachment, and I think that there were a couple times that Rand Paul had some issues with Roberts during that, if you recall. But other than that, but that's Rand Paul. Yeah. But other than that, there were no other Republicans who jumped on that bandwagon of criticizing Roberts, because there was no reason to. And Roberts was an impartial figure. I would expect this time we're going to see many Republicans, claim that Leahy is being overtly partisan, or his handling of it is not to their satisfaction. Regardless of whether there's any validity to it, you're going to see those claims happen.
Well, Leahy is about as partisan as you get. I mean, his reputation is not for bipartisanship.
No.
Pat Leahy will throw elbows. He is as partisan a Democratic senator as you're going to find.
And he's been in the Senate for 50 years, so he has a history of partisanship. Yeah.
I don't understand what Leahy is going to provide to this. I understand that there weren't a lot of good options probably, but it almost seems like he is the worst possible Democrat they could have chosen to preside over this. Yeah, I'm with you. I think Roberts owes everybody an explanation to why he chose not to sit on this. And I think if there's one thing the Democrats could have started right off the bat that would have put this in a less partisan view would have been to choose somebody other than Leahy to preside over the proceedings. I mean, Leahy is older than dirt. There's a solid chance he's not going to run for re-election again. Maybe the saving grace is this is his swan song, and he doesn't want to blow up his legacy, knowing that this is going to be the last impression people have of him nationally as a senator. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that there's probably some validity to that. In a similar vein, I think if you're going to see any unlikely Republicans come along beyond the crew of six, so, looking at the most likely, of course, as we've said, are like Romney, Toomey, Sass, Portman, Murkowski, Collins, and then you get out beyond those to, McConnell's allies in the Senate. If I would watch any of them who are considered possible retirements in the next election cycle or the one after, because those are the ones that who are considered retirements that have little to nothing to lose. So they're more likely to do that. People like Richard Shelby of Alabama, who is getting up there in years and may retire. It's still kind of an open question of like Roy Blunt, whether or not he runs again. If he's thinking about retiring, he may be willing to take a vote he otherwise wouldn't take. So that's something. Those are the ones to also consider. Richard Burr of North Carolina.
Yeah, and and the whole thing about witnesses, I understand the concept of precedent in the law, but just because no impeachment trial has ever had witnesses doesn't mean you can't call them.
Yeah.
I mean, for historical purposes, Nixon never went to impeachment. Just the Senate Republicans marched to his office, basically told him it was over and he was done. So he never went to impeachment. Clinton got to impeachment and there were no witnesses there. Here, I don't understand the debate around calling witnesses. If you're going to have a trial, isn't it implied that you're going to bring people in to give firsthand account and evidential accounts of what happened that day? This is where, just because there's no precedent for it, I think a lot of Republicans are treating it as you can't call witnesses. My understanding of that's a total procedural issue. The Democrats, for the most part, are in charge of putting the procedures for this together. There's no reason why they can't call witnesses if they choose.
Exactly right. None at all. I mean, really, before 2020, we only had 2 impeachment trials in our entire history as a country. Yeah. Like you said, we had Clinton's and then we had Andrew Johnson's. I mean, and so, you have to go back well over, 150 years. So there really is no rules in terms of, whether or not witnesses can be called or not called. It's up to the impeachment managers to determine those rules. So it's kind of ridiculous to get hung up on those details because there's nothing that says that can't happen. The rules for impeachment and how it's conducted and what can be said or not said are fairly broad. It's not really spelled out in detail in the Constitution intentionally to provide that type of latitude, depending on what is considered necessary for the trial.
And don't you just feel as a consumer, you owe me witnesses? This is the second time you've drugged him to impeachment. Okay, if you're going to do it, especially now that he's out of office. So the goal, the stated goal of this from a legal outcome perspective is to get him ineligible to run again. Okay, if that's what you're trying to do, then use all the tools to do it. I expect witnesses at this trial, if they're actually going to try to show the type of evidence that can convince 17 Republican senators and the American people that he should not be allowed to run again, we're going to have to hear witnesses. We don't need the shaman guy, but we do need some witnesses.
That absolutely, and that's the most effective way that you present evidence and that you make your case is through witnesses. It's just you can't really make an effective case, I think, without witnesses. I mean, it becomes very challenging, and there isn't a lack of good, reliable witnesses to draw from. We've
Yeah.
already talked about several of them. It's a matter of making those contacts, reaching out, and that's what I hope has been done, and we'll see next week. Because I mean, probably even more so now, there is more of an opportunity to have good witnesses than we saw in the first impeachment, because the reluctance to testify
Yeah.
isn't as strong as we saw the first time. So that's a positive for the Democrats.
And Lindsey Graham made some weird veiled threat about if you break the seal on witnesses, this is going to go in directions Democrats don't want to go. He doesn't want to have to call in the FBI to talk about the Russian collusion hoax, which again, I don't know how that connects to what happened at the Capitol. But
yeah, that's not germane to this, and it's not relevant. So I don't see how he could pursue that anyway. I mean, that would be out of order.
I don't understand the threat to that. It's like, hey, Brandon, I'm going to go to trial and I'm going to tell a bunch of bad stuff that you did. And you're like, well, I'm going to tell on you too. Well, we're both going to get told on. I don't.
Right.
And the stuff that you're going to tell, everybody already knows. I've got a whole bunch of new stuff that they haven't heard before. I'm just trying to piece together what is Lindsey Graham's political angle in trying to make that threat. And other than just going on record that he does not want to participate in this, I don't think that threat's going to alter anything the Democrats do.
I don't think so. I mean, I think maybe the strategy there is to distract, have a divert attention. It's a diversionary tactic. But, and you think he probably thinks he can muddy the waters by trying to introduce all of this and then say, hey, Democrats were on this witch hunt before. This is just an extension of that. It's much ado about nothing. But again, if that's their response back, I don't see how that's going to be effective, because the fact is that the American public doesn't place what happened on January 6th in the context of the Russian collusion investigation.
I agree.
That was very political. That was difficult to understand. There was a lot of nuances involved. There were a lot of loose ends that had to be tied up, which ended up not happening. That could be conveyed in a soundbite. Everybody watched what happened on January 6th. We all lived that. That was, for many, that was like a 9/11 moment. So that, there wasn't any ambiguity about what happened. So it's going to be very difficult for Republicans to try to just somehow throw all of that together, because Americans witnessed what happened. They saw how the president reacted, and there was universal condemnation as well, unlike what we saw with the Russian collusion investigation, because that did fall along party lines. We didn't see that occur on January 6th. So you can't conflate two different events that are vastly different.
Is there a deal to be made here? Is there a deal with Republicans to say, listen, we can cut out a lot of this. Just vote to impeach the dude, to basically, we'll stand behind you. And that what this was about was making sure he does not get back into the political game. It feels like, and maybe this is a complete fantasy on my part, but it feels like there's a small path where we could come to some kind of negotiated settlement on this and not go through the entire impeachment trial. Am I just making stuff up to entertain myself, or is there any possibility that would happen?
I would love to see something like that. I mean, it's logical. It makes sense that there would be some kind of melding of the minds, come to an agreement, and I think in normal times there would be. I don't see that happening this time, because I think, if anything, the public spectacle of an impeachment trial is necessary, because any Republicans that are likely to vote for impeachment would need that to happen, would need the case to be made publicly to be able to be confident in their vote and to back up their vote. Because you have to realize too many of these senators are still very afraid of Trump and his supporters. And, they're going to need every push, nudge that they can get to do the right thing. But at the same time, I think Democrats would be smart to kind of make an effective case saying, hey, look, by voting for impeachment too, you hasten the demise of Trump as a factor within the party. He's going to continue to be an albatross around your necks for future elections. And I think a key example of that was his meeting with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like Trump knows what he's doing. Meeting with her the last weekend before she was up for that vote of censure was done intentionally to indicate that he supported her. And that should make Republicans very nervous and anxious. And, the one key that they should keep in mind is anything we can do to kind of toss him on the dustbin of history and to move past him is good. And impeachment is one way to do that.
And I think from the Democrat side, maybe this is a bad idea from my end because any negotiated settlement, I would have to give up my January 6th card. I would have to agree to stop bledgeling the Republican Party with what happened on the 6th. And I don't know if I want to do that because I think the other thing that interesting happened this week is AOC put out a video. I think it was like an hour-long Instagram video where she talked about her reaction to the violence at the Capitol. And she talked about she was a sexual assault survivor and how she processed that day. And it's a great video because she was very honest in that video. And she talked about she is melting down. She is having a panic attack, which I understand. I think that's a completely legitimate response to those events. But then she goes into Katie Porter's office, who's just sitting there drinking a cup of coffee, like, give it an hour, we'll get back to it, they'll clear this, and this was no big deal. And it was interesting to see how she framed two different reactions to the same event. And of course, the Republicans came out and basically tried to like say her story was bullshit. She wasn't even in the building. She was on the complex. My point here being is that the Republicans, that's all part of our January 6th strategy. And the Republicans are going to have to deal with stuff like that, which they're not really that good at. I think you would agree with me that you don't want the Republican senators popping off or commenting on AOC's story where she talks about her trauma as a sexual assault survivor. That just seems that's going good to go nowhere.
No.
So if we're going to negotiate a settlement as the Democrats, I would have to give up all of that. That feels like just in sheer evil, cynical, political power terms, that's the best card I got right now. And that card's going to last a while. Maybe I wouldn't give that up in any type of negotiated settlement.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Democrats should be cautious of doing that because I think that there is still much responsibility to be had. And, this does not absolve Republicans of the responsibility they had leading up to January 6th with fanning the flames of Trump's false voter fraud allegations and the stolen election rhetoric. And there's a lot of blame to be there because this was a fire that was building and building and building. And many of us saw the potential for what ended up happening. And we saw this happen in real time from election day to January 6th. And so Democrats shouldn't give that up, without, I think, a lot in return. But because politically, that's something that Republicans are going to have to grapple with for years to come.
And I get it that what I certainly said and some of what you said, there's some cynical politics in that, but that's where we are.
Yeah.
And to expect the Democrat and Republican Party not to play cynical politics right now, you may have not been paying a lot of attention the last couple of years with where we are. I agree there needs to be a de-escalation and people need to lay down their arms, but I don't think this is the one. This is not the de-escalation point. You mentioned Ben Sasse, and he put out, well, Ben Sasse is getting censured again. Did the Nebraska Republicans actually pass his censure? Or are they still in the process?
I think they're still in the process. I don't think it's passed yet.
And they did censure him earlier. Or they censured him in 2020, I believe, or 2019.
They did,
something something he's popped off about Trump that he didn't like, and they did it. So Ben Sasse put out this really good 5-minute video on this censure. It's really, really good. And he basically tells the Republicans in Nebraska, hey, I didn't change, you did. I'm not the one still worshiping at the idol of Trump. It's you. And that 5-minute video, if you can find it on Twitter, it's really, really good.
Well, and it's also great because it wasn't just about him, right? I mean, he kind of gives a middle finger to the Nebraska Central Committee, GOP Central Committee, which is pondering this censor motion. But, he calls them out, and basically says, you guys are the hypocrites. Like you said, I haven't changed, but this is all just about me not, he actually used a quote, not bending the knee to one guy. And, and we need to return to not being a party that has this weird devotion to one man. And he continues that because he goes back to January 6th and he talks about how January 6th is going to leave a scar on our nation because he reminds people that this was the first time in 220 years that we didn't have a peaceful transition of power. And that, this is something that's going to haunt us for years and years to come. So he really, I think, not only he summarized the impact and the lasting impact of that day's events and how the Republican Party itself needs to do some soul searching. And then he, I think, got a couple of good digs in there as well, because he also mentioned, he's like, Trump lost the Omaha-based 2nd District of Nebraska. He's like, my campaign won it.
And in 2020.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And he's like, we won it and we outperformed Trump in Nebraska as well, statewide. So he's like, you really need to look and think about in terms of having a message that appeals to most Nebraskans, which I think is also emblematic of appealing to most Americans. Do you want to stick with this one man and his message, or are you willing to kind of look beyond, this personality cult? And he actually uses the term personality cult as well. So he really summarizes the entire challenge for the Republican Party.
It's a 5-minute video. It's really good. I am really trying to like Ben Sasse. I like this video. Jonah Goldberg, who we talked about last week, he is a big fan of Ben Sasse. So after you and I talked about Ben yesterday, I went back, though, and reread his Wall Street Journal op-ed, Make the Senate Great Again, and it's as terrible as I first thought. So I don't know if I can get there with Ben Sasse when what he really wants to do, when some of his suggestions are, again, senators should only serve one 12-year term and they should be appointed by the state legislation. So I still can't get there with Ben Sasse when basically one of his ways to fix the Senate is to cut out the democratic process that elects senators. So I'm getting closer with Ben, but I don't think I'm going to be able to close that gap totally with him.
Yeah, I would just say I think Ben Sasse has started to redeem himself a lot, and not just with this video. He also penned, for those that didn't see it, a pretty lengthy piece for The Atlantic about the QAnon rabbit hole and the damage it's doing to democracy, which was also very good and something that I think every Republican needs to read, as well as every Republican should watch this 5-minute video that he put out. But
I'm sorry. I wanted to ask you this question. That you just remind me of this. So, is it fair to say that Sasse does not reflect the majority of people's political views in his home state?
I think in some ways it does. The fact that you have these local party committees that are, coming out against him, and it's not just one. The Central Committee is entertaining this motion against him, but there are local county committees as well that have already issued their own censor motions against him. So he is likely in a position where he's in opposite of how the local GOP voters believe. I think that's going to create headaches. Now, he faced a primary opponent before and defeated him handily with 75% of the vote. But the circumstances are different this time. So I think when he's up again, it's going to be a very different environment. The question is, does he choose to run again, or is he just throwing in the towel and saying, I'm out? The fact that he is as vocal as he is now may be an indication that he's going to be done with elected politics.
Is Sasse a great case study in we really don't care what your personal moral, ethical views are? You were elected by a state to reflect the political opinions and will of the people that elected you, period. That's your job. We don't care if you don't like the dude that we all voted for. We don't care if you think his style and approach is wrong. The people that elected you think it is. I guess what I'm saying is one way to look at this, especially for the Senate's, just shut up and do what your state wants to do. Is that one way we could look at this instead of expecting someone like a Ben Sasse to operate in a way that's completely opposite in some ways of the constituents that elected him?
That is one way of looking at it, but I think the problem here is, inherently throughout our history, senators have been elected, yes, to represent their states, but there's been this kind of counterbalance with representing your state, but also voting your conscience and making decisions based on what you have at hand that the vast majority of your voters are not aware of. And that goes without saying for any member of Congress. Members of Congress receive information daily, weekly, that the average American does not see or receive. They're exposed to behavior and information that none of us are. So that's the whole idea. That's why we don't have a direct democracy, is that we elect representative democracy, is we know we're electing Americans full time that will have access to that information and sometimes make decisions that we may disagree with, but we also are supposed to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, well, they know more than we may know at this given time. And this is a little bit more problematic because you have this personality cult around Trump. So you have so many people in many of the red states who say, I don't care, what Trump says about X, Y, or Z. I just want you to support him 100% of the time, vote with him, be a reliable vote for him. But really, that goes against the whole idea of having a legislative branch that's supposed to be a counterbalance and a check on the executive branch. Because if you have a whole segment of voters that are electing members of the House and Senate solely to be rubber stamps for the president, that's not how our government was intended to be set up.
But isn't Ben Sasse's real problem is what a lot of senators' problem is? They all want to run for president. Somehow right. The Senate now is the bed for developing, I guess, presidential talent. And he's really not that concerned about his home state. He's way more concerned about a potential 2024 presidential run.
National electorate, yeah.
Yeah, I think that has infected the Senate. Every senator, well, I was going to cut an age bracket, but what 80? Any senator under 80 thinks they're still viable for the presidency. And I think that's what's shaping a lot of their behavior has turned from what's my constituency in my state telling me to how am I building a national brand to potentially run for president.
So that is a sea change from what we've seen in the past, because many of these senators come into office with that immediate mindset, building up their national profile, their national brand. Who is example number one of that, Craig? There's somebody that comes to mind immediately for me.
I was just going to ask you, how many people in the United States today know the name Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Exactly. Look, and how many knew it, prior to the November election? Perfect example.
Not even people in the district she won knew it.
Right.
And so pivoting to Marjorie Taylor Greene, one, did you see any of her? I think I asked you this and you said you did, but she gave this press conference on Friday, I believe, after her committee assignments got taken away. I think Fox was the only ones that covered it, but it's very apparent she feels no remorse for anything she has done. She's a political hack who's only there to pursue power. That's all this is. And her press conference to the media was just absolutely atrocious.
Yeah, I heard and read about it later. I did not see the full video other than a couple of clips, but it's not out of the realm of what I would expect from her. And she's been fairly non-apologetic. I think that's what's been most striking. She has, expressed regret, which is like the lowest modicum of remorse. She's not apologized, has not issued any direct apologies for any of the statements that she's made and the rhetoric that she's espoused. And she's been indignant. Immediately after she faced that vote by the full House, the next morning, she was talked about how she was laughing it off and criticizing Democrats and the 11 Republicans who went along with it.
So let's take this from Kevin McCarthy's position first, and let's first look at this through the political lens. And I'm under the belief that this narrative of Democrats tying all Republicans to Trump and to what happened on the 6th ends when the Republicans decide it ends. And it could have in some ways ended with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Kevin McCarthy and the Republican Leadership Committee could have easily stripped her of her committee assignments, come out and gave a completely logical reason to why that happened. They could have also done it and offered her a path back to those committees. They could have kicked her off now and said in 6 months, we'll reevaluate this, or next year or whatever, if you show some contrition and some changes in your behavior. What's the political calculation for McCarthy not doing that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think it's just a matter of weak leadership. I mean, essentially is what it is. It's a, if you followed McCarthy throughout his career, he's somebody who has wanted to be liked and to make all factions happy. And that's been his MO, and that's how he's been able to advance in leadership. And that has not changed. And we haven't seen that change despite these external events that are, great reason for him to change tactics and change his approach. He hasn't done that. I think, number one example of that was that he had, for the first time, despite being a Trump lackey for weeks, he had come out, said that Trump bore some responsibility for what happened, but then he walked that back a couple weeks later with this, ridiculous statement that we all as Americans bear responsibility. And then he made his pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago to do the photo op with Trump and to be in his good graces, despite the fact that Trump, called him a profane name. So he is, I think, looking at the writing on the wall and figures that, his caucus, his party cannot win without Trump supporters. So he's trying to thread this needle between the part of his caucus that wants people like Liz Cheney punished, and then the calls that he's getting to have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene reined in. And he's feeling it from both sides. I mean, particularly from corporate backers, the spigot has been cut off as far as donations to the party. And so he's having to deal with that. But his mindset is to try to appease everybody via inaction. He essentially makes everybody unhappy, but at the same time, it kind of works to his advantage as long as the party's in minority status, because there isn't really an incentive for anybody to challenge him, because you have the Freedom Caucus members like Jim Jordan, like Steve Scalise and the rest, who basically just kind of walk all over him and see him as a lightweight and a pushover, and they're able to still accomplish what they need and get done. So he's not an effective leader, but in some ways, now that he's in the minority, he doesn't have to be. And what you're going to see spheres of influence in the House conference pop up, with various personalities kind of rising up and kind of creating their own fiefdoms under McCarthy, and he's going to be somewhat powerless and oblivious to it. So that's
what I don't get is McCarthy made the calculation that it is better off politically to position Marjorie Taylor Greene as a victim of Democrats' overreach than it was to discipline her for her behavior. And her behavior includes creating Facebook ads during her campaign, which called herself the squad's greatest threat, and pictured her holding an AR-15 next to pictures of Ilhan Omar, AOC, and Rashida Tlaib. This is also the woman who retweeted something, I believe, or reposted something that said Pelosi needed to be killed. So what McCarthy is saying is that what my base wants is to us to talk about and present her and her being victimized by big tech and Nancy Pelosi. That's a better story and paints us in a better light than saying the chick that did all of this we got rid of because she's fundamentally not a serious person and it's a really serious time. I just don't understand that at all. I just don't know how can you make that calculation?
Well, and it's not. I think it doesn't pass the smell test. I mean, the problem McCarthy has with Marjorie Taylor Greene is it's not just one or two or three incidents. I mean, it's a whole paper trail, online digital paper trail of statements that have been made across social media, videos of antagonistic behavior. So this is not something in isolation. These are statements that she made in many cases, not just on her personal page, but on her congressional campaign Facebook page. She made some of these statements as recent as this past, as last summer. So, this isn't somehow that she evolved and doesn't believe any of this anymore. And it's also, I think McCarthy bears some culpability here as well. And he has to defend the fact that the Republican Party identified her as one of their young guns, which is basically early on one of the people they were going to support with fundraising, because easily they knew all this about her during the summer, and they could have held back those funds and said, we're not going to support you with fundraising, just like they did with Steve King of Iowa, who eventually lost his primary. They pulled all funding and they said, he was kicked off committees. He was policed by their caucus effectively. And that would have been the approach to take with her. And they chose not to. And instead, they chose to highlight her to fundraisers and donors and say, no, she's worthy of supporting. Give your money to her.
This is what leads me to more confusion about what the Republican Party stands for, and what's their future. And this is the evidence that I use to say they just haven't picked a direction yet. They still just don't know what Trump's influence is going to be. And they're just too scared to put their foot down on anything, thinking that the ground might slide out from under them as soon as they get here. The one thing that I wanted to put to rest, and I think you agree with me on this, is that Marjorie Taylor Greene's behavior is completely separate and different than the squad's behavior. Yes, the squad has said some things that are anti-Semitic. There is no doubt about that, and that should be dealt with. Nobody is saying that should be seen as right. But right. There is a difference between not supporting the BDS movement or saying that Israel has hypnotized the world. Again, these are not positive things. They are old anti-Semitic tropes that should be gotten away with. And nobody is saying that's right. But come on, that is so different than saying Nancy Pelosi needs to be shot in the head.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even
carrying a gun.
It's not even comparable. Yeah, one version is caustic political rhetoric, and obviously some tinged with anti-Semitism, versus a whole history of violent rhetoric, encouraging, inciting violence and execution of your political opponents. And the most clear terms. I mean, without any ambiguity. And then you add in the just support of every conspiracy theory possible, from 9/11 trutherism to claiming school shootings were false flag operations and the students were paid actors. I mean, so there, you can't really. It's justifying the unjustifiable, because you can point directly to Marjorie Taylor Greene giving direct support to the QAnon theories and those who supported QAnon. And you can draw a link between that and the beliefs that led to the incitement that we saw on January 6th and the attack on the Capitol, because she parroted that same rhetoric, stolen election rhetoric, the same, just insane theories about elite Democrats and the pedophilia. So all of that has incited violence and threats to elected officials over the past several years. And she's been right there in the mix of all of that.
Every time I say the word Louis Gohmert, I always say stupidest human in Congress. And I feel comfortable saying that. And if I ever got sued by Congressman Gohmert, I would feel very comfortable sitting in front of a judge saying, I'd like to go through a list of Congressman Gohmert's comments, and you tell me if it's wrong to say he's the stupidest person in Congress. But Louis has some saving graces. One, he's not very ambitious. He knows his place in the field. He is the right-wing kook job who's in a secure district in Texas that when the party needs to push somebody out there who can maybe start a conversation from an extreme position, that's the role he plays. And he plays it really well, and he's happy to do it, and he's good at it. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, these are people in Congress that are the only thing that really fuels them is ambition. And they don't see themselves as Congress people. And that's what's so different. And maybe that's part of the Trump kind of halo effect, that now we have a whole class of people that are winning congressional elections. And at the federal level, a congressional election is the easiest one to win. It takes the least amount of money. You need the least amount of support. And depending on what party you're in, if you get in the right district, it's almost a layup that you're going to get elected. See Marjorie Taylor Greene.
And it's almost impossible for them to get defeated as well, right?
Yes.
Because, I mean, the way that these district boundaries are drawn and the gerrymandering, I mean, they have these seats for life and can basically do anything. And it's why you have this phenomenon now where these individuals don't really feel compelled to directly represent their constituents necessarily, or to govern, or to be able to deliver on public policy. You had Matt Gaetz, who actually said, I think 5 or 6 days ago, he prefaced it by saying, well, I care about what my constituents think and I want to be effective and deliver for them. But I see my role as being able to carry the Trump mantle and to be Trump's defender. And that's in so many words.
He was on Fox the other day, Matt Gaetz, and looked right into the camera and said, hey, if your party's not in power, you really can't do a whole lot in Congress. That's how it's set up. So I've set my office up and I'm more about messaging right now than getting anything done. Yeah. So he just basically said, I have no policy ideas. I have no policy suggestions. I am here to basically message for the Republican Party. And I think that's the point. In the past, when you got a kook slid into Congress, it was Gohmert who did funny stuff and acted dumb, but he stayed in his district in Texas and he was fine with that. I mean, now you've got Marjorie Taylor Greene, you have Matt Gaetz, you've got that guy from North Carolina, Madison Carthorne or something. Yeah. These people view themselves very, very differently. This is just a step one, a congressional seat. All of them see themselves in the Senate and beyond, even to the point where Matt Gaetz went to Wyoming and hold a rally against Liz Cheney. And then said, I have the votes to kick her off of that committee, and then got just absolutely embarrassed when she won fairly comfortable. And again, politically, I have nothing in common with Liz Cheney, but I like her in the fact that she called her shot too. She told the Republican leadership committee, call a vote on my seat. Do it. See what happens. I'm up for it.
And she hasn't backed down. She was asked to apologize and she's like, I'm not going to apologize for the vote.
Do you know my last name? Do you know who my dad is? Do you think I'm going to bow down to an idiot like Matt Gaetz? That's ridiculous. And yes, she's probably going to get primaried. Can she survive that primary, Brandon?
I think it's going to be tough. I think she's going to lose. I mean, it would be. I just, you have to remember too. Wyoming is a state that voted 70 +% for Trump. I think it was his highest margin of any state. And it's Trump country out there. And she's already, by the way, we were talking about censor motions against Ben Sasse. She's facing several from Wyoming Republican Party organizations.
You've talked about this a lot during this podcast, but yeah, I think it's fair to say that you feel the primary system is broke and needs to be completely rethought.
Completely, because I mean, the primary system produces the most extreme candidates, and it is geared towards appeasing the party activists. This was something that former Missouri Senator John Danforth spoke on recently, because he said he wouldn't be able to get elected in a primary today, and he's absolutely right.
There's no way.
The party activists, the people that get out and vote in primaries, they want the red meat, they want the rhetoric, they're not focused on policy. And so you have to cater to this very small select group, which is, becoming more and more extreme. And they're becoming more and more extreme because think about it this way, too. More and more Americans are registering as independents or unaffiliated. That's where the growth in party registration is. So that means that the party registrations for both major parties are becoming more smaller. And so the core group that votes in the primaries are becoming more and more ideologically extreme. So it produces candidates who are not appealing to the vast majority of the electorate. And so really you need to look at reforms like ranked choice voting, nonpartisan blanket primaries, where you have all the candidates from all parties run in one primary together. And that enables the prospect of more moderate candidates being able to come out of that. But the current system isn't working. I mean, it worked once upon a time, but the way that politics is done today, and as long as more people keep leaving the two major parties and becoming unaffiliated, we're only going to see that phenomenon increase.
And wasn't the reason for making this switch was to try to find people that were more electable in a general election? Because before this, the party picked who was going to run.
Right. Yeah. So the idea was they didn't want people kind of the backroom deal making, where the party insiders would be smoking cigars in the back rooms and then just choosing the candidates. And so they're like, we want this to be more reflective of the popular will and support of average voters. And so the whole idea is that the party's voters and activists and the people that are on the front lines of getting out the vote should be able to make that decision. So it was born out of like the populism that came out of the early 1900s, late 1800s, and so it made complete sense in that respect. The irony is now that the tables have turned. The way that the system works now, the people that come out of the candidates coming out of the primary are less representative of the electorate at large, and it's likely that the insiders, so to speak, the insiders would be choosing people who would be more reflective of the broader electorate.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I don't think if the party were picking, you wouldn't get Marjorie Taylor Greens. You wouldn't get Matt Gaetz. You probably wouldn't get a Ron DeSantis either. I mean, let's remember, Ron DeSantis is the one who ran primary ads, I believe, with his young child building a Lego block wall. I mean, this is what primaries get you these days. Brandon, you described the old process as a bunch of old dudes sitting around smoking cigars, picking somebody. Yeah. I kind of would rather go back to that right now.
It would produce stability. I mean, there's something to be said for the stability we get out of that, because, I mean, if you look at the way the primaries happen now, they're drag out, knockout fights. They become very extreme. We see they become a precursor to the type of general election debates and arguments we see. And I think anybody who's kind of been through the process on a statewide campaign or even on a presidential campaign and see how grueling it is and how the candidates are so beaten up and destroyed by the end of the process.
Yeah. And the money it takes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the money is just, it's incredible. And it keeps, the amount of money it takes to run for office ensures that you have this type of candidate, personality-based, self-branding candidate, because as soon as they make it through the primary and get elected, they're focused on building their brand so they can get money. Because, again, by positioning yourself as someone who's ideologically extreme, against consensus, someone who is an obstructionist, you're more likely to get the money you need from the fringe groups and organizations. And so it all feeds into each other. And so you make the money. If you're a consensus builder, I mean, you could still gain donations, but not as much as by being an obstructionist. So the whole system right now is kind of built for those types of people. And so it produces the gridlock we see.
The Jack Danforth interview you referenced was with Charlie Sykes' podcast for The Bulwark.
Yeah.
Everybody should listen to that. It was so refreshing just to hear an adult, a politician from yesteryear. I mean, it literally felt like he was talking about the Senate 200 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, and Jack Danforth is the, kind of statesman of yesteryear. Yeah. I mean, he was somebody who had a long and storied career in Missouri politics, well respected, somebody who was very policy minded, policy wonk, a great impact on international relations and foreign policy. And he does not exemplify Missouri Republican politics today at all.
No, there's no way. And he listed off when he was in the Senate, he's like, there were Republican senators in these states. And he's listing off like Massachusetts, California, places that are deep, deep blue right now. And he basically has said, hey, I was in the Senate 20, 25 years ago, but, I'm still here. I mean, this wasn't that long ago. If this trend continues, I don't know where this is going to lead for the Republican Party.
I mean, it's basically we're still kind of where we were, right after the election. Fragmentation. Where does the party go? Does the party fragment? Do you have the Trump people form their own party? Do you have disaffected Republicans continue to leave en masse? It should be worrisome for the Republican Party, the fact that if you look at state by state, you have tens of thousands of Republicans who have changed their registration, which is very significant and all-time records. And so you see this taking place after the January 6th insurrection. Places like Arizona and Pennsylvania, and some of these essential, purple states that Republicans would need to win future elections. And these suburban voters, they continue to bleed, and it's not a sustainable path. So it's like you keep the Trumpy factor, but at what cost?
Did you see that picture of the ice floating on Lake Michigan?
I don't think so.
It's like these big chunks of ice. They're sitting there looking at the Chicago skyline, and there's these big, huge chunks of ice. I pictured that as the Republican Party. Everything's fragmented. Everything's undulating up and down. There's big pieces that could crush you, but you could actually maybe find some solid ground on it. But there's all these little pieces colliding into each other. If that's the Republican Party, what's the catalyst that solidifies all of that? Is there one thing, one event? What could you add to that mix that makes that one solid sheet of ice, or melts it all and becomes just one cohesive body of water? Is there one ingredient, one thing? What could change that would change that situation across the board?
I mean, you would need a counterweight to Trump in terms of an effective leader, which you don't have now. If you think about the trajectory of the Republican Party, after the Nixon years, it was in shambles. And so it was really Reagan who was able to bring the party together and coalesce the coalition.
Can the Republicans move forward without a person? That's a good question, because I don't think you can you?
I don't think so. I mean, it's been the history of politics in this country that, you've had effective leaders that have come about, and that's really what the party has rallied around and with. So you really can't do that in absence of that. If you go back during the early 2000s, that was the criticism, because after Bill Clinton, the Democrats were kind of wandering around in the wilderness without a leader. And then Obama came along and he unified the party for a while. And then, after that. And so the Republicans are in that place. But the difference for them versus prior instances with the Democrats is that Reagan coalition is really coming undone. So, the social conservatives, national security conservatives, the fiscal conservatives, like that is really just completely falling apart, because it's being replaced by what I call the conspiracy conservatives. And so if the conspiracy conservatives are the preeminent voter bloc that the Republican Party is willing to ditch, then those other three pieces are going to become completely unhinged and start breaking away. And so that's the danger for the party.
If you stay the conspiracy party, the lake never changes.
No.
It's just always mixed pieces of undulating that you can never do anything.
That's exactly right.
Isn't it amazing that how sophisticated we think we are as human beings, we still have this caveman instinct to just take the biggest person in the tribe and follow them?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it takes, something like that, somebody specific to be the leader and to bring a party together. And I wish there were other options, but there just doesn't seem to be.
And people coalesce around people, not ideas. There's ideas you like, but you can form a party of a person. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's got to have a personal thing to it. Brandon, that was a quick hour. I don't know if it was the topics or the fact that the Chiefs game's on here, the Super Bowl is on this afternoon. That went by kind of really, really quick. So you said you've got some Super Bowl plans that you've made today?
I am, yeah. So gearing up to go to my sister's to watch the Super Bowl. Excited about that. Excited for Chiefs win tonight and second Super Bowl 2 years in a row. Pretty amazing for those of us in Kansas City to be a part of this.
If you think back to the bad quarterback years,
Yeah,
I mean, there were a lot of them. It's just so nice to have the guy who's young, who, you know, when a Nebraska Furniture Mart commercial came on with him and his fiance, and it just makes you feel good that that's our quarterback. He plays for our team. You're not going to turn on the TV tomorrow and see that he got drunk in Westport and punched somebody. That's not going to happen. So it's a good feeling.
He's insanely talented, but he's also an extremely likable guy. He's, great character. He's rooted in the community. Like, he's a part of Kansas City. And and then of course, we're going up against Tom Brady. And I mean, everybody hates Tom Brady, right? So this is awesome.
I don't.
Oh, really?
I like dynasties. I want. So, would you rather have lived through the Cinderella story, or do you want to live through the dynasty? I'd rather. To me, the '90s Bulls are way more interesting than the one team that wins one championship one time. Because I think. I always equated to, I've never been a high level athlete, but anything business you do, just the strength it takes to do it at a high level over and over. That's always what I'm interested in. So yes, I like Tom Brady. I definitely want them to lose, but you got to give him his props at 43 to go to a new team and get them to where they are today.
I give him credit. I mean, he's a great player. I mean, he's been able to, I think, do something that very few can do year after year after year. And I mean, his record speaks for itself, but his personality wise, I find him a little bit off-putting.
Well, yeah, he is. And you can't eat avocados and nightshade and still play football at 43. Okay, Tom. Yeah, we get it. You keep yourself in shape. There may be a little more to it than just avocado ice cream and eggplant occasionally.
Yeah, that diet. Did you see I mean, who could do that diet? That's insane.
Yeah, I that's insane.
What's so weird restrictive. I mean, because it even restricts a lot of vegetables. Like, I mean, it's like, what is there left to eat? Like after all that.
But they showed a picture of him on draft day. He looks identical. He has not aged a day.
At all. That's true.
That's modern chemistry, modern surgery, and the good diet helps. But come on, Tom.
But you're right. I think there's a lot we don't know. I mean, when you're a multimillionaire and you have access to the best doctors and surgeons and nutritionists,
LeBron James puts his personal health budget at over $1 million a year. That's just vitamins, treatments, ointments, lotions. When you've got that kind of money, maybe that gets a little bit easier.
I think you're right. Yeah, it definitely helps a lot. And plus, I think for the average person to make those types of sacrifices in terms of your diet or, regimen, you can't. But when you have millions of dollars to kind of offset it, it's a little bit easier.
Well, you're right. When you can only eat 3 vegetables and turkey, that gets hard to do.
Yeah.
Or what, I mean, like I said, he can't even eat vegetables on this diet. I think he eats like eggplant, avocados, and turkey breast, and that's it.
There are a lot of vegetables I consider healthy that he can't eat as part of the diet. I was like, there's very few things left.
I agree. When you are putting your vegetables in different categories of good, you might have gone a little bit too far.
Right.
Or you're just not a normal your job isn't a normal person's job. You're a pro athlete or something.
Yeah.
We'll end it there with Tom Brady's diet. Go Chiefs.
Go Chiefs. Brandon. Thanks, Craig.
Thanks for listening to 2 Men in the Middle. Make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our website at 2meninthemiddle.com. Drop us an email at 2meninthemiddle@gmail.com or tweet at us at 2 Men in the Middle. We'll see you next week.